Hello everyone and welcome back to Dragalia Foundry, a fan channel where everything Dragalia Lost can be found. This video is the finale to my dragon tier list series, where every week I went through and ranked the dragons of Dragalia Lost by element on a tier list from S+ to F, ranking them from best to worst, left to right. So it's been 5 weeks at this point. I've ranked all of the different elements of dragons: water, wind, flame, shadow, and most recently light. And basically the purpose of this video is going to be to go back through and look at our work and sort of review things in light of new information as well as all of your comments and feedback, and see, do I still sit well with this tier list? Is there anything I would want to tweak or change as a final look at the dragons in Dragalia Lost and to sort of conclude and round out this series? Now, going forward in the future, I may think back on this and sort of reference this as my personal ranking here and talk about new dragons in the context of where I might want to put them. But at the end of the day, this is kind of a moment in time thing. And y'all know I'm not a huge fan of tier lists methodologically, so I did this for fun and because I think it's interesting. It fosters an interesting conversation. So don't take it too seriously, just be careful out there and reference back to the earlier videos if you want to hear more of the reasoning or need explains exactly what every dragon does. This video is going to be unscripted, less formal. We're just going to kind of walk through and talk about, is there anything that we want to really change here as our last look? Alright, so I think we'll start with the light element. That's the element I did most recently, and actually, based on your comments, there are several things that I want to switch up. So, in spite of this being the most recent one and made after the release of Lilith, I do think there are some things that I could change here to sort of improve this. So first of all, I think if you look here at the D and F tier, I was definitely too high on the novelty of Shishima. I just sort of like the fact that he provides critical damage, but it's not actually very good. I like the fact that he's unique, but at the end of the day, Lindworm and Unicorn are going to put in so much more work for beginner players, so I don't want to cause confusion here. I think that I have to move Shishimai down below both of them, and perhaps even below that. I do still think there's upside to critical damage because light is the inspiration element, or at least one of them, in some ways with Lucretia. But yeah, the critical damage ability with no critical rate to access it is just not very good. But he is free, so I don't think he's horrible. Halloween Silk, also another dragon that in my recordings, I was trying to keep the F tier mostly to the baby and story dragons, but honestly, Halloween Silk probably going to be an F tier dragon as well. She's limited, she's a 4-star dragon that has mixed HP and strength. Her skill doesn't really do anything useful, so I think that she is at the end of the day an F tier dragon. Like, your Unicorn's going to be better on your healers, your Lindworm's going to be better on your DPS. It's going to be a very rare case that you'd want this type of 4-star kind of junker dragon, and it's unfortunate because she is a seasonal collab and a cutie, but so is such is the life of a tier list, so she goes down to the F tier. As for the higher tiers up here, I think that I put Jean below Tie Shan Gongju, but I actually think that she ends up being a little better for Hildegard and autos, so I'm going to bump her up. She's also free to unbind via Draconic Essences. I don't think I'm going to move Tie down to the C tier though. I think that she's still a pretty good dragon with some potential for the future, but I do think that Jean is going to be better. TA mainly better for co-op if you want to get faster shared skill use, but that's about it. And then looking at the C tier, one thing I didn't really do much of is speculate on Legend Tartarus, so I think speculating on that, I'm going to go ahead and bump up here both Takumi Kazuchi as well as Lumiere Pandora, probably in that order, although it's a little bit hard to say. I think that at the end of the day, yes, these two dragons here, these 35% HP and strength dragons, High Jupiter and Liger, sure, they're serviceable options for healers, but like, you really don't use them very much. I think that Jean is just more consistent for autos, and outside of that, like, when are you using healers? If you're using Gala Zena, I suppose you could try them, but I think you might want to just have Jean anyway. So yeah, I think they're okay. They're really good filler dragons. Just mixed stats is okay for beginner players, but I think that Pandora is actually, I underrated her a little bit. I still think that, like, she's an F in Lilith and she's an A in Tartarus, so she lands in the middle. But looking ahead to Legend Tartarus eventually, these two dragons could potentially be good. You know, Takamikazuchi with Overdrive Punisher could be good for shredding the Berserk Overdrive gauge, so that is a potential thing here. He is in the Draconic Essences, so he's not the worst. And then otherwise, I don't know if I would change anything necessarily. I mean, Jean might even be better than like Gilgamesh because having Hildegard is so important for Lilith, but I think I'm going to leave those where they are. Just remember they're for different purposes. And then Popstar Siren might actually be kind of worse. She might actually want to move down here. I'm torn on this, but I think maybe she's actually more like here. You just don't see her used too much. She can't really be used that effectively against Lilith. In co-op, maybe a little bit more effectively, but in solo, not really at all. And in Tartarus, right now she doesn't really get used a lot, so maybe a low B speculative for Legend Tartarus, and then currently, you know, sometimes you'll see her like an Expert in Master Volk, but that has fallen off a lot as well, and now that she can't be used in off-element Legends, like, that has fallen off, so I think I'm gonna give her a little bit of a downgrade. Otherwise, you know, there is the question, do you go with the S+ here? And I think I leave it. I think I'm going to leave it as is. So this is my final take for the light element. Going to leave Cupid above Corsaint slightly, even though if you're getting consistent paralysis, Corsaint's going to be better for you. I think that this is where I end up with light. So yeah, it's been the most recent, but still a few things I wanted to change in the end. All right, so let's move on to Shadow. And Shadow's another tricky one. Shadow just has so many of these dragons that have sort of like one good home and or a few good homes where they work really well on. There's so many trade-offs in the Shadow element, you know, like, can you keep a combo? Okay, Cat Sheath is somebody to consider. Do you care about shapeshifting? If you do, you probably don't want to look at Fatalis, because if you shapeshift, you're going to get cursed. And yes, there are workarounds, but it's a caveat to consider. Can you poison? Epimetheus might be a good dragon for you. Are you low HP? Then maybe you're looking at Andromeda. So all of these little considerations come into play here, and just looking at things. One thing I did in my ranking was, you know, I did try kind of make a joke with the C tier basically being dragons that work on Grace, and for that reason, some of these bad B tier dragons I kept out of the C tier just because I really wanted to hammer home the point that like these are all dragons that make sense on Grace. But realistically, some of these B tier dragons are going to be worse than others, and probably worse than some of the stuff in the C tier, even though, to be clear, the C tier stuff is like just for Grace or healers. So specifically, you know, Marishi 10, Nyarlathotep have definitely seen better days, so I could easily see them justifiably coming down a tier here, with the knowledge that like they're more in this DPS lineup and the other dragons here are more intended for Grace. And you know, some of these dragons that are worse for Grace than others, just stats-wise, like, it's not that unreasonable to actually separate out here. Although, this was a tricky one, because, like, it does depend on what you want. Like, Abisu has more HP, Silk has the defense down, which actually makes her kind of relevant, Meridimus has the freeze, Mini Zodi is just free in the Fafnir Metal Exchange, and that's one of the best beginner options. But I think you could do something like this. Probably put Silver Fafnir down at an F now that we've seen, as of now, with the Dragalia Digest over, there's still no other sync for mana, so right now mana's not really a thing that you want to farm. Maybe Barbatos is better than Parallel Zodiac, they're pretty close, but I think that something like this is probably more realistic if I didn't try cram everything for Grace into one tier. And then one thing with Chthonius also that I wanted to point out, I think in the video I said that it's a 75% strength dragon, but apparently the strength buffs you get from it are visible buffs. That does make it a little bit worse, but it's still in the Draconic Essences, so I'm not going to put it below Giovanni. I think that it's still above Giovanni. And then Andromeda, I think that Andromeda and Fatalis, one thing that came out in the comments as well, apparently I'm not the only Bellina player who has still been using those instead of Arsene and finds those to end up being a little bit better. I think part of the reason for that is that you always want to be in Dragon Drive and you don't want to spam skills and accidentally fall out of it against Kaiyan, so if you're trying to play a little bit more carefully or conservatively, having the actual strength compared to having just the skill damage can be beneficial. Other than that, I don't think I would change the B tier here. And the A tier, well, Bronze Fafnir's buff is not going to work particularly well against Nihility. Cat is not going to work well against Nihility, and I mentioned that in the video, but she might end up being a lot worse than A tier. She might actually fall down, because if it's true Nihility with high frequency like in Lilith, then basically she's going to be an F. So maybe she ends up somewhere like at the top of the C range, unfortunately. We could do that speculatively, I guess. I mean, she does have her good uses with overdamage, though, right now. And so for current content, I guess she's still an A. I just don't want to speculate because I don't know how often Curse of Nihility is going to happen in other elements necessarily. So I'm going to leave her here, but be very careful about this cat. This might be a very high cat, all things considered. And in the S tier, you know, maybe Ramiel, I probably was a little bit high on. Maybe we do something like this, moving Arsene above. Or even if we wanted to go the way of demoting Cat here, you know, maybe Cat's really more of a B, similar to Thor, where against certain bosses she could be an S, but against other bosses she's going to fall down to like a D or even an F. So I put her here. We'll leave it like this. This is a little bit speculative, but I think that maybe this is more realistic. Ramiel is a little bit more narrow than Arsene and Azazel, so I think it's fair to consider him at an A. And maybe even below Shinobi. Shinobi is in the Draconic Essences, and there are a lot of good characters that want skill damage dragons. A dragon relatively unaffected by Nihility, so maybe we do that even. And then these are two comparable strength dragons. Fatalis more strength, Ramiel more utility effects. So yeah, maybe something like this. As you can see, it's not an exact science, so we're gonna go with it. We're gonna lock it in, and now let's move on to the flame list here. Let's see what I was thinking at that time and see how off I am from then to now. All right, so with Flame, Mars still seems like a lock at S+. I think that they're gonna have to do something pretty impressive with Reborn Agni for us to really want to summon for Reborn Agni. Looking down at the lower tiers here, I don't see anything I would necessarily change with F and D. You know, Mini, Hildy, really, you probably care more about these strength dragons. This mixed dragon's rare, but she's going to be in the Fafnir Metal Exchange soon, be totally free. For beginners, that mixed thing and working on all elements is kind of handy, so I'll leave her there. Kagetsuchi, these prime dragons are seemingly going to get worse because of Nihility, but they have had some use in time attack, so I think we could potentially leave it at a C. We could demote Kagetsuchi to a D, honestly. He's not in the Draconic Essences. Maybe even worse than that, but I guess we leave him there at a high D. And then one of the big things that y'all were commenting on was Dread King Rathalos being better than I ranked him. That's certainly possible. My take on it was, if you got a Dread King Rathalos today, would it be worth investing Sunlight Stones in Max Unbinding? Or are you better off saving those for like a Gozu Tenno or for Gala Mars at some point, because Sunlight Stones are pretty rare. But now with the Encyclopedia feature, you do get a slight HP bump from Max Unbinding your dragon, so from a collection standpoint and just being a sweet dragon, as well as being probably more serviceable than I give him credit for on 4-striking characters, I do think that it's legitimate to bump him up here. And I don't know if he's above or below Horus, but I think that he's at least on the same level. And he could potentially be better, you know, than some of these other dragons on a 4-strike heavy character. But these other dragons are in the Draconic Essences. I'm going to put that really highly. Getting that Max Unbind for free is really nice. Whereas with these two that I rank lower, you have to spend Sunlight Stones. It's such a heavy cost that I'm going to rank them lower there. For the C tier now, it's looking a little bit sparse, isn't it? So I don't know if we demote anybody or if we just leave it as is, a little bit sparse here. But a couple commenters also pointed out, like, they prefer to use Prometheus on their healers compared to a mix HP and strength dragons. I personally feel like the mix is a little bit better for the recovery potency. It doesn't matter too much though, so maybe Prometheus ends up being better. So maybe yeah, we give the nod to Prometheus. You know, with Lilith, one thing that we saw was like Gilgamesh relevant for auto. So this is also speculative, but Prometheus, even though, does he matter too much for Volk right now, autos or solos or any form of playing Volk? He doesn't really matter too much. You could really work around him if you want to, if you have high enough stats. but very beginner-friendly entry point for any type of ranged character. The extra survival is appreciated, and then looking ahead to something like our future Sinister Dominion bosses, there is the potential there that this could be a relevant dragon, so I'll give it that. Anything that I would change otherwise, like, do we bring Kakatsuchi back up so that the C tier isn't so sad? I don't know. Maybe not. B here, sometimes Apollo's going to be better than Arctos. Sometimes Arctos is going to be better than Apollo. Likewise, I suppose sometimes these 60% dragons are going to be better, but Cerberus pretty much always better than Agni. I think the A tier is solid with Konohana Sakuya and Phoenix. Phoenix, again, kind of an anomaly that really a lot of endgame players don't use Phoenix at all. So maybe she could be lower here. Like maybe she is C tier and fills out this kind of like healer defensive dragon kind of little role that they have going on here at the C tier. But I think I leave her. And Gozu Tenno, I think he's an S. He's worse than Mars, but still really good. Yeah, so again, not an exact science. I guess if I had to change things up, I would probably change it up like this. Alright, so let's move on and look at the wind element next. So wind element, our second to last one. This was an element where I chose not to put anything in S+. So am I still satisfied with that? I think so. These Gala Reborn dragons grew on me as the series went on, and I think that Zephyr might actually be better than I'm giving him credit for, but I think that Zephyr and Reborn mids as of now in my mind are sort of both really good and comparable, with Zephyr being preferred to Reborn mids to spend Sunlight Stones on. Freya and Vayu I think are both excellent, so I'm going to leave them where they are at A. The B and C tier are sort of just a mismatch of just kind of random odds and ends of dragons. And then looking to D and F, so kind of a similar thing. I guess I put the mini dragon first because of the availability in the Fafnir exchange and versatility for a beginner player, and these event dragons worse than the 4-star gacha dragons respectively. F tier looks fine. So for the C tier, you know, maybe we do the Haster demotion, similar to demoting of Kagutsuchi. I think that Long Long's still good on Linyu, relatively speaking, so we probably leave Long Long. We leave Garuda. She has her use on Templar Hope and autos. I don't know why I necessarily put Midgard Swarmer here above Garuda. High Midgard, that is. These mixed dragons, I like them for beginners, but like they aren't necessarily that great. So maybe this actually is worse, but yeah, because Garuda has like a really specific purpose, whereas this mixed HP and strength, 35% Midgar, I don't know what his real purpose is. And you know, the corrosion mechanic is unique to Lilith, so it's not like every Sinister Dominion will necessarily need a lot of healing in the way that Lilith does. So even that type of speculation might not hold, and even then, Garuda is 60% HP, so arguably she might end up being better in that scenario too. So I think we do this. I don't know if we get Zephyr up here with the B tier or not. I sort of doubt it, but looking at the B tier, Menoetius is still kind of a blind spot. Some of this is still a blind spot because I'm recording just before Legend Ciela, so I will admit that. But I don't know that I necessarily changed a whole lot here at the B tier. Maybe Summer Konohana Sakuya ends up being a little bit better. In fact, well, with both of these, they kind of could fulfill that Prometheus Gilgamesh role of defensive utility dragons in future difficult autos. And for something like Legend Ciela or our future Sinister Dominion, both of them have definitely have more potential now that we're getting hard content for our wind adventurers. So I will recognize that. Neither of them are farmable via Draconic Essences though, so that is a little bit of a downside on them. I wonder if we put Pazuzu any higher because of him being farmable, but I still feel like he's kind of middling here, where Ariel and Garland are better enough that despite the fact you can't unbind them for free, I'm going to put them higher. I think at the end of the day we leave this one. This one seemed to be relatively good with how I place things, I guess. And then finally, water, the last element for today and the first element that I ended up reviewing and ranking. So first of all, there's a new dragon, Gabrielle, that we have to play somewhere, and then this one was the first one I did, so there's probably a lot of things that we're going to want to change here. You know, one of the comments I got early on was like, why is Vojinoy in the same tier as Dragalia Lost? He's strictly worse. My thinking on that was just like that these are sort of comparable filler dragons because Dragalia Lost is not powerful enough that you would want to max and bind her if you got her today with Sunlight Stone. So from an investment standpoint, these kind of do a similar thing for you. If you have a random one of Jeanne d'Arc with no unbinds or one unbind, and you have a max and bound Vojinoy, these are kind of comparable. But at the end of the day, Vojinoy, I think he is a D. So I think I move Vojinoy down, probably below Penglai because of the utility with the Bog. And Penglai might even be better than this if that becomes a popular strategy again. But outside of Time Attack, which now is element locked, like you just don't see Penglai too often doing his thing. But I do acknowledge the possibility here. That's why I put him above Vojinoy, when normally I would put the Strength Dragon highest here. And then Styx could be an F. I stand by the D on potential of future updates. Obviously with Sinister Dominion, I don't think that Styx is looking particularly good, so that could be a reason to demote her actually, unfortunate as it may be. Now one dragon that's gotten better with the Sinister Dominion is definitely Halloween Meridimus. So at the time, my take on this was GNC is so much better and so clearly dominates Halloween Meridimus that there's no reason, even if you get this, why are you going to stone this and use this? And to an extent, I stand by that because I think that GNC is actually better on healers in Sinister Dominion than Meridimus is. When you're not able to finish combos, you don't get the highest amount of SP generation, the skill haste starts to fall off, the skill recharge, every time you use a skill, you get your SP back. I feel like my performance has been decisively better on my healers using GNC compared to using Halloween Meridimus, even though you would think the HP stat is more beneficial than the strength stat. So that's been my experience using Jiangxia. I don't know if that's theoretically the case or should be the case, or if I'm just anecdotally speaking on that, but that's been the case for me. So, but having said that, this is still a good dragon to have for healers in that fight. So I think it gets bumped up to a B. I think I'm going to put it here behind Simurgh. Simurgh also respectable dragon for healers. Good even for DPS, frankly, if you need extra survival. Like it's not the worst, and it is used in auto shapeshift comps for Master Twins farming. So I leave Simurgh here at a B with the Draconic Essence availability. I add our cute Halloween Meridimus Kamui. Unfortunately, Kamui coming down here. He's in the essences, so I guess I put him at the bottom of the C instead of top of the D, like the other dragons that are similar with the prime strength, but pretty bad. And then what else do we want to do here? So Nimbus is a dragon that got a lot worse. Nimbus might be able to come down. I would say Poseidon, Gale Reborn Poseidon. A lot of y'all wanted him above Siren. I think I'm with that now. I think I have a better appreciation now that there are actually a lot of water characters who rely upon their strength and not just skill damage. Not everything is about Karina off-element cheese, especially with Sinister Dominion. So I have to give Gale Reborn Poseidon the credit. He puts in a lot of work in the water phase against Master Lilith, and he's just a very good dragon. Since the time I recorded, you know, now he also works against more Sayari, which if you're using a budget team, you know, you're using water. You're not using the Mim, Templar, Hope, Gala, Cleo, Grace setup. Like if you're using a Zane-free team or something, yes, this will be a good dragon on one of your characters. So I think that this is actually, these Reborn Dragons are approaching S+ because of the fact they work in Sinister Dominion. And honestly, I think that GNC doesn't fall though, because even though Dazzling Dance Floor doesn't really work, the skill recharge is still really good, and this dragon works so well in other modes as well that I think it stays at S+. You know, maybe you could make the case for something like with both of them at S+, but I'm going to leave that. I'm just going to move Reborn Poseidon, despite the fact that it costs stones, above Siren, and realistically all the Reborn Dragons now are good enough that I would say spend the stones on them, you're probably not going to regret it. So Siren falls down a little bit here. Leviathan's still very good. He works on some of those dragons, or characters rather, that need strength in Sinister Dominion, so I think that we leave Leviathan. I think we move in Gabrielle right here at the A tier. She's technically better than Leviathan, I think, because she's a 60% strength dragon just like him. She may not cause bog on her skill, but it seems that Lilith can't even be bogged really, so the frostbite she causes might actually even be better for a good frostbite uptime. And then she also has this whole additional passive that makes her really good for defense and regen. And so I think that she deserves to be here at an A. The only reason I put her below Leviathan is just, frankly, that he's totally free to unbind in the essences. So investment-wise, he's a really good beginner investment alongside Siren. That's going to cover a lot of your water characters. And then Gabrielle, if you're a more recent player joining the game, like over the long term, this is going to be your new standard for 60% strength dragons. But I don't think she's quite broken out yet. Maybe against Yaldabaoth, she'll end up being really good if you use a water team against that as well. Okay, so what else? High Mercury and Poseidon are kind of in a weird spot here, where are they, you know, is High Mercury's bog that much better than Poseidon's non-bog, that they're separate tiers? Honestly, probably not. With the encyclopedia as well, like, now it's definitely worth max unbinding your first Poseidon with Draconic Essences. So, whereas before I think I made a comment in my video that said, like, he's pretty bad, you probably won't even want to actually farm up the essences to max unbind him. Now you probably do want to get that first max unbound copy just for registration purposes, but they're still kind of middling. But because of the fact that you do need healers against Lilith, well, you pretty much need healers unless you want to do some shenanigans, then I think that they're more around a C. And Dragalia Lost, like, I'm going to put her at a B. I still think that she's weaker, that you wouldn't necessarily want to go out of your way to try farm her up and unbind her. Like, she does have a higher potential upside than somebody like Leviathan on an AI character. But I've just been realizing that there are a lot of the characters that actually work, you know, like your Lapis, like your Yoshitsunes, that actually work pretty effectively against Lilith in the Master Phase. They are more of the strength-oriented characters compared to the skill damage and skill spammers and buff characters. So I think that I acknowledge her legitimacy here as like a pretty medium but good filler strength dragon, so I bump her up. And otherwise, Nimbus is the last thing that I'm not sure if Nimbus deserves to be at the A tier anymore, because against Lilith specifically, the negation of buffs with Curse of Nihility, he becomes really quite bad without the Water Agito skill. So I think that that is enough for me to put Nimbus down below the A tier. High B, I mean, maybe even here. Maybe here? I'm not sure. It's tough to evaluate because he's good in one setting against the twins, but not in others. So I think I'll put him there kind of with Dragalia Lost, where these are sort of your conditional situational DPS. These are sort of your situational DPS / healer. And we'll call it a day at that. I think we've gone through enough of my quandaries with the tier list of how exactly to put everything on here. Obviously, as you can see, there are a lot of permutations to this. It's definitely, for the third time I'll say, it's definitely not an exact science, but it was a lot of fun working on the series and just kind of putting it together week after week. So I have had a lot of fun with it, and I hope you've enjoyed it as well. I think this is going to be the last we work on any type of dragon tier list for some time. But definitely let me know if there are other types of tier lists that you want to see. I'm more open to doing that type of content, and it's been a pretty cool exploration and new video style for me. So let me know if you enjoyed it and what you'd like to see next. That is going to do it for today, everyone. So thank you as always for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time.